All right. So with all that out of the way, glad to get the errors out of the way now. With all that out of the way, thank you again for joining me. Today, I'm excited to be speaking about an IPM or creating a plan of attack. And what is an IPM? It's an integrated pest management program. I know I kind of broke the rules by throwing an acronym in the title, but I feel like integrated pest management, creating a plan of attack would have been a really long title. And to give you an idea of what we have going on today, I'm going to be speaking to you about what really is an IPM, some of the arguments I've heard against them, some of the strengths that I advocate for, what we're going to need to do to establish an IPM, the levels throughout an IPM, and to be clear, everyone, that this presentation is going to focus most heavily on the highest levels of control within the chemical aspects, but I'm going to be covering all topics because within an IPM, you want to work yourself up to those chemical forms of control. And then towards the end there, with that said, I'm going to be focusing on some text, tips, terms, and tricks, because I like alliteration, to help you get the most bang out of your buck in your spray program. And then lastly, I want to show you what resources are available, where to find them, and how to take advantage of them in an appropriate manner throughout the growing season. Before we really jump into everything, just a little bit of webinar etiquette. If you do have any questions or anything, please put them in the Q&A box, not necessarily the chat box. And I only say that because I am very easily distracted in all of the questions popping up. I look forward to answering them at the end of the presentation, but can be distracting as I'm in the middle of one of my crazy rants. And if you do happen to like this content, please feel free to look on our website for past and future webinars. And Rodale Institute. What are we? We are essentially like an organic agricultural research center that has been around for several decades. And one of the newest additions to the Rodale entity or institution is the consulting department, of which I am a part of. You know, we've done the research, we look to advocate and educate, and now we wanted to be able to provide that technical assistance for farmers such as yourself. If you do happen to have any questions or comments about like the consulting program, feel free to reach out to me or Rodale directly. You can find that information on the website. All of our services throughout the country when it comes to agronomic assistance are free. And please be mindful that this is going to be a chemical conversation. And with this chemical conversation, it's hard to not use certain like products. And I just want it to be known that I'm not showing any innate biases by including any particular products or any inherent dissatisfaction by anything I may be including. I just want to speak to the products that I have some personal experience with. And if there's something that you think is really extraordinary that I hadn't mentioned, please feel free to let me know, because this is one of the most rapidly developing fields in organic agriculture. And so there's great stuff coming out all the time. So what is an IPM? The way I always like to think of an IPM is that it is a framework that a grower can utilize that uses science-based decision making while taking into consideration like ecological aspects that we have to coexist with on our operation, like pest biology, environmental data, even the capacity that you have to perform certain pest controlling practices like tillage. You may be a no-till operation and can't do that. So that comes, of course, comes into your IPM. And some of you may be here because you've heard the term a biointensive program or a biointensive IPM, and that's essentially the term that is coined when you just build on everything that I have said, and you are taking a greater acknowledgement or a kind of like a step back to get a bigger picture of some of those ecological processes. So you're going to be looking at how like the plant can defend itself, how the plant is shown to be susceptible to the particular pest, the pest ecology in your area, native beneficial organisms such as native predators, and so on and so forth. All of that is taken into consideration because you're ultimately going to be spraying more, but less product in order to attain a more uniform level of control. Strengths and weaknesses of an IPM. This is a lot of the common hot point or points of contention when I'm speaking with farmers that I run into is within an IPM is that like it can be too time consuming, and it absolutely can be if you are in the middle of doing something and you're walking about, you see an issue that needs to be addressed right away. So you got to go back, clean up, prepare your equipment, go through the actual process of spraying, properly cleaning up your equipment, and then going back to the task at hand. If you do not have it built into your schedule or some semblance of a routine, it can be very time consuming. But if you just have the ability to try to incorporate some additional practices, pardon me, into your operation, as you establish that routine, even if you don't honor it to a T, it's a lot easier to incorporate passively into your day by day if you know that you're not going to be able to address it to the entirety that it should be. And that's a circumstance where it's something is better than nothing, but ultimately it's just that you are trying to put something into your operation is going to allow you the flexibility to start to work this into your program, into your operation. It's a lesser concern. The spring is here. I got a million things to do. I need to start seeding. I need to actually get some transplants that I've been weathering off into the ground. I have to make sure that I am marketing my CSA share and on top of several other things. It's not a concern. And you're right, it isn't immediately. Seldomly weed pressure is, or insect pressure is, but you know it's going to become one. So if you know it is, let's take a little bit of time now to establish some preventative measures. So that way, when it does become a problem, you don't have to invest yourself nearly to the same degree, both in time and in cost, because I know how much it costs for some of these organic systemic products. Like it's a whole CSA share for a quart. Like that is hard to stomach sometimes. And one of the reasons why we get into that circumstance or having to rely on those products is because we wait until it's a problem. So if you do take that step back, you allow yourself to use a larger variety of solutions. And in that larger variety of solutions, they are more ecologically sustainable and more manageable for your finances. Now, there is some difficulty with it. I'm not going to be ignorant to that fact. There is a learning curve. And people say that it can be unforgiving. Well, there's a lot of resources that are available to make that as digestible as a lesson as possible. But ultimately, like if you are having this problem, there are going to be some growing pains, just like there is going to be with any hardship that you come across on your farm. And one thing that isn't spoken about enough when it comes to IPMs is how mentally empowering it is as a grower. You can say, I'm going into the next season knowing that this particular problem, flea beetles, squash bugs, powdery mildew, what have you, I know that what was an issue last year, I have created a plan to handle this year. And that is a very, very powerful tool to motivate you to keep going forward rather than fearing an inevitable problem. You are able to, I mean, I guess it gets cliched, it is prepare for battle or you're prepared for battle. And as I mentioned, like we are going to be working our way up to these higher levels of control here. And if we do find ourselves relying on these higher levels of control, and mind you, not all of these are organic, I just think this is a very good representative picture. But if we find ourselves relying on these higher levels of control, there is an issue within our system that we need to try to find the root cause of, identify and solve, so we don't have to continue to take these extreme measures. If you always have these extreme measures, we need to be looking elsewhere. And that's where we're going to start this, is with those. The first step in taking those measures is understanding what the issue is and where it's coming from. I do apologize now. I've been on like a philosophy kick and I've been into some military philosophy recently, so you're going to be seeing some cheesy quotes. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And that is the epitome of a growing season in my mind. Because every week, every day, there's something unforeseen that you're most likely going to have to deal with. You are the operator and owner Like, you know yourself or your farm better than anyone else. So half of the battle is already won. Now it comes to the other half. And then part of that is understanding, are we dealing with something that's abiotic or biotic? Is it alive or is it not alive? If it's alive, like, what is it exactly? Is it a vertebrate or an invertebrate? And for brevity's sake, I'm going to be speaking mostly about insects during this presentation. And so there are resources available um, that are able to help you kind of anticipate when this is going to happen. If you look at the right here, the pest GDD lists, those are pest growing degree days. And a growing degree day is essentially a unit of heat measurement that's used to kind of catalog the development of the growing season as the year moves by. And that's really nice because see, like, the weather will always get warmer in the beginning of the year and will always get cooler at the end of the year. Pests will show up in the beginning of the year and they will go away at the end of the year. And so these growing degree days are a way to almost like approximate like the life stages of insects or diseases, but insects. And then you're able to take that and look at what are called forecasting models to say, like, okay, well, I have pest A, I have Japanese beetle, or Japanese beetle was an issue. I may be able to go to one of these resources and see when I can, based on how warm the season has been, anticipate this becoming a problem. And I'm going to show you why that's valuable later on, but it gives you an idea as to when you can start spraying. Is it biotic or abiotic? Is it not alive? Do you have control over it or don't you? Is it the sun? Is it the wind? Is it the water? Have you tested your water? We're going to be talking about that more. Is it nutritional? Like, one of the largest hurdles for us in the beginning of the year as organic farmers is soil temperature. So sometimes that can play a very impactful role. So knowing how to find the resources to be able to anticipate these problems or know when to act is going to be the foundation for an IPM. And with part of that is acknowledging that sometimes we can be the problem. I can tell you how to grow vegetables till I'm blue in the face, but if you ask me how to grow a string of pearls, I am not the man to talk to. And I say that because a lot of times we don't realize what we're doing that can contribute to our own hardships. Like, are you working out in the field, hoeing your market garden, and then tomorrow you're going to be seeding in the prop tunnel? If that's the case, are you wearing clean clothes? I would assume so. I hope so. Are you wearing the same shoes? Because that mud that's dried on there is going to get wet, like it's going to fall off as you walk about or as it gets waterlogged, and you've potentially introduced that inoculum into what was a sanitary environment. But speaking of sanitation, there's a lot of little aspects that we need to be aware of. Like, when you're watering, who's doing the watering? It should be the person that is most invested into your operation, especially when it comes to spraying, because you need to make sure that every plant is addressed. You need to make sure that no plant is over addressed. You need to make sure that even if you're not actively spraying, that you are aware of where the hose is. Is it laying on the ground? Because if so, that's another circumstance where you have just potentially introduced that disease pressure that you brought in earlier from those dirty shoes onto your new seedlings that just sprouted. Well, my heart goes a flutter when I walk into a greenhouse and I see that there's hooks all over the place for people to just latch their wand so they can address whatever they have to address before they go back to watering or whatever business they were. Then beyond that, mechanical injury, herbicide damage, and heating sources are also like common places of contention that it ultimately will come down to being aware of the situation. But speaking of being aware of the situation, it comes down to like building the system, because the more you're aware, the better you can build a system. And if you have a system together, you will never not encounter hardship, but you are going to be able to handle that tide of adversity as the season develops. And the first step in this, or the first layer of protection, you will, is the cultural steps that you can take. And essentially those are any states that you can, or steps that you can take, pardon me, to dissuade infestation or to develop unfavorable conditions for a particular pest. Planting spacing interacting with like the canopy density so you're not getting coverage, planting later or earlier to avoid particular flights. Fertility issues can be a thing, and that can go back to how are you testing your water, or it could just be like that is the state of your soil. There are little things that we need to do to be mindful, because this is all going to be about context and adjustments. As you in the moment, you need to be able to gather the context in the moment and adjust as soon as you are able to. Sometimes that has to be next season, sometimes that is at the next session, sometimes that is immediately. But it's always going to be changing. You know, you need to, when you're kind of looking at like, well, are my cultural controls like working? Like look at your production efficiency, look at your yields, your soil conservation, look at the predator habitat that you have as well, especially like for the pest predator complex of anything that you know that you are currently contending with on your farm, as well as the climate and the environment. There's a lot to take in, there's a lot of context to absorb, and that is why this is the foundation, is because every day we need to realize what we're doing. Physical slash mechanical is any amount of or any practice with the intent to create a barrier to pest infestation or to destroy a particular pest. And that's usually done by like creating unsuitable means for their entry, or reproduction or survival. Cultivation, flaming, trapping, all of these, like nothing here is necessarily um, too unforeseen. I inspect this. The way I like to think of the physical side of it is, for the most part, this is going to be your site prep. This is going to be anything you can do on a large scale to manage your problems, because outside of that, it's going to be spot treatment, it's going to be pruning, it's going to be roguing, which is like literally like taking a trash bag over an infected plant and like pulling it out and disposing of it. You know, those are really the two different types I look at for mechanical controls. After that is biological, and before we dive into biological, this is where things start to get a little complex, I will say, because like with cultural and physical means of control, it's very obvious. It's widely accepted what those practices are, how they work, and what to do. And I'm not saying that as in they are simple. Each one of those practices that I went back, each one of these practices here, mulching, solarization, flaming, tilling, all of those in and of themselves are worthy of multiple presentations or webinars. But it's there's no discussion on on the practice itself, more so how it's done best. When we get into biological, we start to branch out. There's three types. There's classic biological control, which is something we don't really do anymore. And this is thought of as you have the origin problem, or you have a pest, you go to the source of origin, you bring in uh, a native pest from that area and you bring it here one time and it establishes itself. That's kind of classic control, and that's the bottom left picture is a Cottony-Cushion scale, and that is a native ladybug, or a ladybug that was introduced from the area where it is from originated in order to like maintain control. You have augmentation. If you're releasing insects, then this is what you're doing. It is the idea of, rather than trying to modify the environment around you, you're introducing a natural enemy to the pest. Or let me clarify that. Rather than introducing a foreign predator to handle the foreign pest, you're introducing a natural predator to handle the foreign pest, but that natural predator is not a native predator. And this is something that is going to have to be done through waves. And this is where things start to get more complicated, as there is going to be additional education on the behalf of the farmer. And that education only grows as we start to look at the means of conservation, biological conservation controls, because this is where you're modifying the environment. You are changing your existing practices to enhance a specific natural enemy to reduce the effects of a particular pest. It is hard to do. It is not impossible to do, and there have been meta-analyses of like conservation practice or biological conservation control. And even if you do everything right, it's not necessarily guaranteed to work because the efficacy is going to be more so at the will of the predator that you're trying to facilitate in your environment. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, and I'm not saying we shouldn't continue to try to figure out this method. I just want it to be known that if you do want to try to handle your pest pressures through means of conservation, it's going to be difficult. So you need to have some patience and you need to understand that there will be some growing pains along the way, more so than trying to obtain a means of control through some of these other practices. Mhm. Within the biological world, you're going to be releasing natural enemies. Predators, parasitoids, and pathogens are the big three. You see the predators, what's commonly used are parasitoids, and pathogens are within the bioinsecticides. Um, Parasitoids are just highly specialized. You can look at the bottom there. There's a corn earworm or tomato fruit worm that has been parasitized, and all of those goodies are going to be hatching out and eating on it, and we all know that. Um, when you start to look at types of natural enemies to introduce into your field, there's kind of like a few check boxes that I would look to run through. And even after doing so, I'm not necessarily saying like you should run out and get ready to purchase some uh, biological forms of control, but rather like it could be worth entertaining a conversation with some individuals that are specialized in this field because they are really the best resources to be going to. Um, Everyone is still kind of actively developing some of these practices, best practices, I should say. But anyways, for natural enemies, I would look to have like an ideal reproductive rate so it's able to sustain itself. I would make sure that it has good scouting or scavenging ability to find the pest in question. I would make sure that if there is a if there's a host specificity, that you know what it is prior to introducing it into your operation, as if you are solely relying on one or two pests, your your beneficials may not um, be the most ideal purchase if rather you have a situation where you have a couple different issues or pests. Like green lacewings are very popular because they're a generalist. They eat aphid eggs, but they eat pretty much any small soft-bodied creature. And to that point, make sure that whenever you are introducing insects, that you are going to be able to synchronize it with the life stage of the pest in which it is most vulnerable. IPM Labs up in New York is probably one of the places I would look into going first if you're interested in this form of control. And as we kind of look more at biological controls, we need to understand that we are narrowing our scope a little bit as these insects are vulnerable to the products that we're getting ready to discuss applying. If this is something that does interest you, Cornell Professor Anne Hujek, pardon me if I mispronounced her name, but she is a wonderful resource. She actually came out with a book that I have referenced at the end of this presentation. Mm. And lastly here, before we jump into the chemical levels of control, these are just some other aspects that I wanted you to take away. There are going to be a few challenges here as well. Invasives are always going to be introduced as time passes. And with biologicals, because of the speciality that generally you will have with a lot of these insects, there will be a need to be flexible and be ready to change what you are sourcing depending on those needs. On top of that, we don't know how climate change will could impact some of like the introduce pests, introduce beneficials, some of the pests that are going to be on the horizon as well. And with it, as mentioned, once again, this is a slower system. And with that slower system, you need to understand that it's a system that you will need to commit to. If you're not necessarily willing to commit to it, that's okay, but it's hard to maintain the levels of control that we're ultimately trying to work towards because this is all still new. Xerxes Society has great information for individuals that are also looking here. Pardon me one click. What's the take on a needed protection for soil and tool, preventing weeds, mulch? It's habitat for slugs, any cultural management that leaves the mulch in. There absolutely are. Daniel, there's like different living mulch covers that we're able to do. There's different practices with how the mulch is introduced and managed while it's on site that can help reduce that type of pressure as well. And then lastly, Daniel, you had also mentioned here that roly-polies are eating your strawberries on mulch dry beds. Roly-polies are usually a symptom of the creation of the type of environment in which they will thrive because they're not actually generally a predator towards living plant materials. They are usually a pest towards decaying plant matter. So like overwatering, overcrowding of your crop, or the overappliance of certain of carbon can lead to that decay in which you will get that roly-poly pressure. Sorry about that, everyone. I wanted to address those now before we had kind of worked past that. And now we're going to be looking at the last step, creating your program and choosing your weapons. I thought about splitting them into like a third and fourth step, but they're kind of done simultaneously. So I figured let's just combine them and knock it all out at once. And one thing I do want to say here is if you really want to get a thorough education on pesticide product label, reach out to your local like FSA or NRCS agent, or just look online at the USDA or EPA. They have all that information as they are the one that creates the criteria in which the pesticide labels need to abide by. I'm not trying to just kind of gloss over this. But with respect to time, I want to make sure that we get the education we need for what we're about to be getting into. And if you look over here on the left side, I have a few acronyms that I'd like us to know. The interval timings is just how long you have to wait until you get back into the field, until after you spray or until after you harvest. Mode of action is how it works, and GRAS, generally regarded as safe, is something that you may hear me say in regards to some of these inputs, such as like dormant oil. These signal words like just show the level of, you should always be aware when you are applying a product to take proper safety precautions. The more serious the signal word, the more obviously serious the concern. In organic agriculture, we have the luxury of most of our products being on the lower end of this. Like it will irritate your eyes. It will be uncomfortable if you get it on you, but it's not going to be causing you Parkinson's. So that is nice. We have not even got to the products yet, but we need to take a moment so I can go on a rant about water, because water is something that will dictate the success of your spray program. Yeah, show of hands, not really, but show of hands, who tests their water? Who knows what their pH is? And I say this because if you don't know, take a moment and educate yourself as to what it may be. Just get a water test. They are not expensive. Pardon me. And you are going to be able to so quickly coop back get back the money you spent on a water test just through the increased efficiency that you will have. Because when your pH is off, it can impact the way in which your crops, or the way in which the pesticide will even work. they will degrade more rapidly because it'll affect their stability. I would always be aware of the solubility of the products, especially if you're mixing them together. Like we're going to jar test and then jar test again. Not really, but I want you to know that you do need to jar test to make sure that you're not going to be damaging any of your equipment, and you're actually going to be able to get ample coverage. And one of the ways you're going to be able to do that is by ensuring that you're able to use adjuvants. And if you're not familiar with what they are, they're essentially a way of ensuring the protection of your products that you are using. One of the biggest contenders here, or one of the biggest issues we fight for using these products in field is UV radiation, and I will give kudos to one product now. Nufilm P. It's an organic pine-based like resin that is able to extend the half-life of the products that you are using because it acts as a barrier for that UV radiation. And it's much, much, much cheaper than anything else you're going to be mixing it with. You will probably not like me the first time you use it because it is a pine sap derivative and it flows like pine sap. So be sure to wear some gloves and coat your measuring products in oil. But with that said, like you're going to be saving some money as well because you're going to be able to better utilize it. Your pH can also damage your equipment as well. And for those that aren't able to source from like a well, because ultimately like that is the best place, especially anything below 80 feet deep. You're not really going to get any baddies below that depth. But if you are sourcing from a shared water body, like what are you doing to make sure that the water that you're sourcing is disinfected and clean? Because you have certain diseases, like water-based diseases, like Phytophthora, that can swim up your irrigation tubes and infect your crop. Nobody wants that. So generally, like if you are looking at your water hardness, I would say 50 to 75 is like a really good place to be in terms of your parts per million. So if we can just take a quick moment, this is gonna, I wanted to speak to some of these products and where I've seen success in them, only to try and shed some clarity on like what we're going to be talking about momentarily. We're going to be incorporating some of these products into what will be our IPM. You have like your biostimulants, like your regalia, which induces the immune system of the plant, if you will. And you have like your kelp and algae-based products, which have plant growth regulators, which is like your cytokines, your auxins, your gibberellins, and all those buzzwords that essentially are able to spur the vigor of your plant. And if you do have a plant that's really struggling or not doing too well, I have seen kelp do amazing things for it. In terms of disease management, though, and to be clear, all of these are part of our disease management toolbox. But in terms of disease management, these biostimulants are really only active preventatively. If you do have an issue, sure, you can apply it. It's not going to solve the issue whatsoever, but it may be able to help prevent further spread of them. Beyond that, we're getting into the biofungicides or bioinsecticides, and these are either living products or the byproducts of living products. So it's either like a bacteria or it's the byproduct of what a bacteria has created in suspension. You have some of those that are kind of industry standard or very common. Your double nickel, which works phenomenal on powdery mildew. You have your Bacillus subtilis, which is one of the oldest organic bioinsecticides. And here you're no longer looking at just like the genus and the species, but we're getting into strains because companion, cease, and serenade are all Bacillus subtilis, but they all have different strains, and so they all behave very differently. That can be a confusing part about this, but strain F727 is going to be different than strain 13A. Outside of that, you have something like Lifeguard, which also spurs the plant's immune system. It's Lifeguard has a really low application rate, and I really have a lot of good things to say about it. Stargus does well on downy mildew, especially. Does some things on powdery mildew, and it's alleged to have some control, alleged to have some organic black rot control. And that may not sound impressive, but we had no black rot control before this, so like I'm really excited about it. Outside of this, you have your products that are like your inoculants, your streptomyces, your trichoderma, and then your like your TerraGrows, which are your like multi-strain mixes that are all going to be like applied to as a seed coating or in a transplant solution. As long as there's like root to product or seed to product contact, these things can do amazing wonders for your crops. And I personally do think that this is kind of like one of the next areas and plant success or productivity, I think is being able to take advantage of introducing like more competitive like fungal or microbial strains into your system. Outside of that, we have like your old but your goodies. You have like your sulfur. If you got powdery mildew on pumpkins, on squash, or on lettuce, like a real low dose, 4 pounds to the acre of soluble sulfur is able to clean that up pretty much better than any of these other products. Um, and there's no worry about it ever developing any sort of resistance. And the same can be said to copper. And copper is like a tricky thing for us because as organic farmers, we love to hate it and hate to love it because it works so well for what it does. It's hard to not create a reliance on it. And so use it, but use it sparingly because there can be concerns of toxicity as well. You have your citric acid products, your soaps and oils, um, as well as your potassium bicarbonate. Your potassium bicarbonate is kind of like your ace in the hole here. It raises the pH of the plant surface. The prior products, the sulfur, the copper, the citric acid products, they more so lower the pH. Potassium bicarb raises the pH. Really, really phenomenal job on powdery mildew, but the issue is it's very hard on the plant as well, on the plant's cuticle specifically. And if you happen to over apply it or you happen to use it too frequently, I tell people no more than 1 month um, between applications. But if you use it too frequently, don't be surprised if you end up like defoliating your entire orchard because that can happen. Speaking of some other concerns though, looking at like your soaps and your oils, they're best done in the start and the end of the season, where the risk of phytotoxicity is lowest because that can be an issue with some of these products. But with that said, you can see here like there's a little bit of a song and dance. A lot of these have the potential to yield some results, but not one of these is any good independently. This is what we have for disease, and this is what we're looking at here for our insect controls as well. You have like your botanical controls, which is generally regarded as safe for the most part. Your neem oils, your citrus oils, and your dormant and essential oils. I'm skipping over the pyrethrins right now. They all are not systemic products. They all are not necessarily the most aggressive products either. These are great initial products to start creating a bit of a routine, to incorporate into a routine program because they are more affordable. They generally are more forgiving to your beneficials, whereas your Pyganic, when you are reaching into your toolbox to bring that out, it's because you know you have a problem that needs fixed now. Oopsies. A lot of these other ones, like your MP, your insecticidal soap, it does well. It helps with like cell membrane disruption. Your sulfur can work, your kaolin clay can work, and your diatomaceous can work, but they're all situational in their own regards. Your bioinsecticides here, like your spinosad, I consider it more of a generalist, just like BT. I consider that more of a generalist or like a systemic application, where some people will argue that it's more biological and it's less, it's more selective, and it is, but it's but not as much as we would like it to be, that I don't think it would warrant it being considered biological. Grandivo and Venerate here are products that you can also incorporate as routine applications. One is a stomach poison, the other one impacts with mating disruption. They are great on harder bodied insects like the flea beetle, for instance. A lot of people do struggle with that, and Venerate can have some efficacy. I'm not going to say it will control a population, but I can see I can see it stop an infestation from getting any worse. So when you incorporate additional modes of action, you're able to get that better control, or that form of control or degree of control that you would like. So we've talked about products. I want you to see what a routine, like, or a routine rotation looks like. And this is going to be for your produce grower, especially anyone in a greenhouse. This right here is just a representation. You have like 5 to up to 8 products, and that sounds crazy. I'm not expecting you to run out and buy them now, but you are going to accumulate products over your career. And as you do, let's start to make sure that there's some differentiation in how they impact the pests that you're going to want to be controlling. Because as we start to put them together and understand by looking at the labels how they interact with their different modes of action, we can see like, oh hey, we are creating a system here. Where week 1, we're going to take our Grandivo and we're going to mix it with Neem, and the second week we're going to be bringing Venerate and incorporating Botanigard, and we're going to throw in Moltex on the third week and substitute the Neem for that while still applying Grandivo. And you see that, like, as you apply throughout the season, you have the flexibility to create many different combinations of modes of actions, and that is the name of integrated pest management's game, is you got to keep them guessing. Pardon me. And then when we get into chemical and some of the other aspects that we need to be mindful of on top of the water, on top of spraying, like there's other aspects that we need to make sure we do our due diligence with. I'm gonna steal a quote that I love, which is, you need to make spraying fun. And I think that is the best way of surmising the approach and the mentality that you need to have towards these higher levels of control. If you are dragging your feet to get there because you know that you're going to have to hand pump for 3 acres or an acre of spraying, and the nozzle doesn't work, and you're going to get all wet because the lid doesn't shut right. Like, it's just, or maybe one of the straps doesn't like hold up as well. There's a lot of little things that you can create an excuse for to not make spraying well, and or not make spraying an enjoyable experience. And I'm not saying like I expect it to be, but I would like you to have the capacity to. And by that, I mean, I want you to be able to spend your time and look and observe and analyze that you are spraying everywhere you need to, and you are getting under the leaves where the aphids hide, and you are getting towards the ground where your beetles will drop to, and you are in the process of spraying. So might as well make sure that you are spraying appropriately. If you've got to this point uh, of your control and you find yourself needing to get to these highest levels of control consistently, they are not going to save you, because we need to look again at that root problem. Usually if there is a hurdle that comes into your system, it is because it is seldomly hard to be unforeseen. For example, this year, Allium leaf miner had a flight 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and that absolutely caught so many farmers off guard. And those that were prepared were those that I know were just spraying because we were getting close to St. Patrick's Day. And though they didn't know that it was going to behoove them because we were going to get an early flight, but they knew that there was a generalized time in which they needed to be spraying, and they knew what products they needed to use. Let's see. Let me answer some questions here. Hope you can tell us more about the organic systemics. Are they safer? Are they more expensive, etc.? Yeah, I can absolutely talk about them real quick, Daniel, before we continue on past this. Organic systemics are exactly what they sound like. They are an organic improved product that has some way, usually by interfering with the nervous system of an insect, to get that automatic control. It's not like it's systemic, and it is equally damaging as like conventional insecticides to a point, for the insects, but it is far less of a concern from a human health or an environmental perspective. It's still as equally damaging to beneficials, though. It's still as potentially equally damaging to pests as well. And I only say potentially as equally is because I am by no means a conventional agronomist, so I can't speak to the efficacy of the products they use. I know copper is commonly recommended, but what other products would you like to recommend for botrytis? Had a bad outbreak recently, which killed many crops. So that's going to probably be, if it was a bad outbreak, it's going to be a little bit more than just incorporating one or two products, Amelia. It's going to be something a little bit more complex than that. Oxidate is going to be one that comes to mind, or jet egg. Those are peroxyacetic acid and hydrogen peroxide products. They're essentially like washes or cleaners. They're going to be able to like create a layer of disinfection, because usually botrytis is something that when you are able to take care of the environment in which it is thriving, the issue will start to cure itself. So please feel free to touch base with me after the webinar, and we can start to like dig down into that. I'm hoping you'll make these slides available post-program. Absolutely, Barbara, I will. And actually, I'll do you one better than that. I do apologize for not mentioning this at the beginning of the presentation, but it will be available. So please feel free to reach out. And I actually have all of these images hot linked to the particular resource for your convenience as well, because I wanted you to be able to see what it would look like. For instance, here's your Japanese beetle. I know I had Japanese beetle last year, so I'm going to touch base at IEM to see what the growth stages are of the Japanese beetle, and I'm going to look at the growing degree days in my area through NIWA, and that is going to give me a timeline as to when I should start managing it. And the same can be done for crop planting and weed management, but this is mostly done for insect and disease problems. And to give you an idea of what that example would look like, this is exactly that. On the left here, I guess I should have swapped it around, but on the left here is NIWA, their growing degree day calculator, and I just took this. I'm based out of central Pennsylvania, so I used Harrisburg International Airport. And you can see here there's a rough approximation of growing degree days that I'm accumulating since the 1st of January. And I can use that information to compare it to the spotted wing Drosophila that is going to start to become a problem in my area. And you see here that at this events table that there's certain marks, like at 510, we could be at peak egg laying by overwintering females. Like I have touched base with my growers and let them know so they can manage appropriately. There's also additional programs available for you to do something like this in the summer. This is UPest out of Oregon State, where you can spend 15 minutes to give them some basic information, and they will email you on a weekly basis to show you essentially what is a combination of these two pieces of information put together. It's very simple, it's very easy. I'm not expecting anyone to run out and do that now, but this is this is this is something you can do while you are easily in the off season. No longer than half an hour, I would say it would take. And I'm advocating for all of these resources because ultimately every farm is going to be unique. And when you're looking at an IPM, there is no one single solution. I stole this this slide from my colleague Ben Lehman, who stole it from our colleague Leah Varik, because it's very true. Like I've mentioned about this trial and error learning curve, and within an IPM, like it is going to be very obvious where your errors are, which gives you the opportunity to learn very quickly. You know. And one thing I do want to say is I don't expect everyone to have like an organic systems plan equivalent of their IPM where they have some document that will say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But I want people to sit down and create this plan because in just creating this plan, in just working through this framework, you're going to be able to, at least then in the moment, rather than have to come up with that framework so you can make those decisions, you can just reference it. Mm-mm. And it doesn't seem, can we get the Q&A access, or can we get access to the Q&A, especially about the Botrytis? I can do you one better. Here's my contact information, Amy Beth, and we can have a further conversation about it because like I said, it's usually contextual. Um, Not to say there aren't any answers, but it is something that is going to be more of a conversation than just taking advantage of a couple products. Uh, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer them. I know I kind of breezed through that and went over a lot. Well, perfect. If anyone does have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me, email or cell, and I'm happy to answer any further questions you have. Yes, Catherine, this was recorded and you'll be able to get those recordings or find those recordings on our website. And that is something I believe it'll be about a week for this presentation or this webinar to be up, but you can find it on our website. Mm. Of course. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I know it was, at least here, a beautiful sunny day, and the last thing we'd want to do is be sitting inside. So it does mean a lot. Please feel free to reach out to me with any comments, as I said, questions or concerns, and I look forward to potentially creating some solutions with you.